I stand in my kitchen past midnight, and the silence feels heavy enough to hold. The overhead light is off. Only the small lamp above the sink casts its weak glow across the countertop, leaving everything else in soft shadows. My tie hangs loose around my neck, the knot pulled apart hours ago. My shirt has come untucked somewhere between dinner and now, between the life I live during daylight and this moment that belongs only to the dark. On the table before me lies a photograph. It's old now, the edges softened with time, the colors slightly faded. Two boys sit in the back seat of a car, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. One of them is me, though I barely recognize that version of myself. 17 years old, all sharp angles and nervous energy. The other boy is Adrian Holt. He was 12 then, gap-toothed and bright-eyed, his hair falling across his forehead in a way that made him look younger than he was. I traced the edge of his face with my finger, following the curve of his cheek, the line of his smile. The paper is smooth under my touch, worn soft from years of being handled, hidden, forgotten, then found again. My chest feels tight with something I cannot name. Grief, maybe, or regret, or the particular ache that comes from remembering a door you never walked through. The kitchen around me feels like a museum of the life I've built. Clean countertops, matching dishware, everything in its place, everything chosen carefully, deliberately. This is the life of a man who follows rules, who does what is expected. But tonight, holding this photograph, I feel like I'm standing at the edge of a cliff I've been avoiding for 20 years. I close my eyes and let myself remember. Really remember, not the sanitized version I've been telling myself for decades. I was 17, and it was the kind of humid summer evening that made your clothes stick to your skin. I stood on the front porch of the Holt house, shifting my weight from foot to foot, my hand hovering over the doorbell. The house was larger than ours, set back from the street with a wide front lawn and tall windows that glowed warm against the gathering dusk. I had been hired to babysit their son while they attended some work function downtown. My parents had reminded me to be responsible, polite, steady. I had nodded because I always did what was expected of me. I was the kind of teenager who never missed curfew, never forgot his homework, never caused trouble. But something about that evening felt different. Maybe it was the way the air seemed to hum with possibility, or maybe it was the knowledge that I would be alone in that house with Adrian for the first time. He wasn't really a child anymore, though at 12 he was still young enough to need watching. Over the past few summers, I had seen him around the neighborhood, riding his bike or playing in his backyard, and I had noticed the way he was changing. His voice cracking at unexpected moments, his limbs growing longer, making him clumsy in a way that was both endearing and oddly unsettling. When the door opened, it was Adrian himself who greeted me. His parents were already rushing around behind him, gathering purses and keys and last-minute instructions. They barely paused to say hello before disappearing into the evening, leaving me standing in their entryway with their son. He looked at me with those wide, curious eyes, and I felt something shift inside my chest. Something I had no words for, something that made my hands feel too large and my voice sound strange to my own ears. He smiled at me, and I smiled back, but underneath that simple exchange was a current I didn't understand. The evening passed quietly. We played board games at the kitchen table. I helped him with a summer reading assignment. We made popcorn and watched a movie on the couch, sitting carefully apart, but somehow still aware of each other's presence in a way that felt charged, electric. Years later, after I had stopped babysitting, after I had graduated and moved on to college, and then to the careful construction of my adult life, there was another evening. Adrian was older then, maybe 16, tall and lean with the same bright eyes, but carrying himself with a new confidence that took my breath away. I had come by the house to drop off something for his mother, some borrowed book or casserole dish, and he answered the door. We stood there in the threshold, neither of us moving to invite me in or send me away. The silence stretched between us, full of things we had never said and never would say. At least, that's what I thought then. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't read, something vulnerable and hopeful and terrified all at once. And then he said it, so softly I almost missed it. Stay? Please. I didn't stay. I made some excuse about being late. about having somewhere to be. I handed him whatever I had come to deliver and walked back to my car, my heart hammering against my ribs. I drove home and told myself I had imagined the weight in his voice, the way he had looked at me like I was something precious and fragile. But I hadn't imagined it. And now, 20 years later, I stand in my kitchen holding this photograph and finally allow myself to remember the truth of that moment. The way he had stood in the doorway watching me leave. The way I had gripped my steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. The way I had spent the rest of that summer avoiding their street entirely. The photograph blurs slightly, and I realize my eyes have filled with tears. I set it down gently, as if it might break, and lean back against the counter. Somewhere upstairs, Elaine is sleeping in our bed, trusting and peaceful, unaware that her life is about to change forever. Because it is. I can feel it in the weight of this moment, in the way the silence seems to pulse around me. I have spent 20 years building a life that fits me like a suit tailored for someone else, and I cannot do it anymore. The morning light finds me in the same kitchen, though the photograph is gone now, tucked away where it has lived for years. I have showered and dressed for work, my tie knotted properly this time, my shirt pressed and tucked. By the time Elaine comes downstairs, I have returned to the version of myself she recognizes. The man who drinks his coffee black and reads the news on his phone while she makes her breakfast. The man who kisses her forehead goodbye and promises to pick up groceries on the way home. This is the life I built after Adrian. Steady, predictable, safe. My office sits on the 14th floor of a glass building downtown, and from my desk I can see the river cutting through the city like a silver thread. I am good at my job because it requires the same qualities I have cultivated in every aspect of my existence. Attention to detail. Reliability. The ability to disappear into the background while getting things done. My colleagues know me as polite and efficient, the kind of man who never misses a deadline and never causes drama. During meetings, I sit quietly and take notes. During lunch breaks, I eat at my desk and return emails. I have been promoted twice in 8 years, not because I am brilliant or ambitious, but because I am invisible in all the right ways. The townhouse Elaine and I share sits in a neighborhood of identical properties, each with a small front garden and a narrow driveway. We chose it together 3 years ago, walking through the empty rooms and nodding at all the right things. Good natural light. Close to public transport. Room to grow, the realtor had said with a meaningful smile, though neither of us had mentioned children. Some conversations live in the space between words. Our walls are lined with carefully chosen decorations. Framed prints from art museums we have visited. Photographs of us at dinner parties and weekend trips, smiling the kind of smiles that look genuine in pictures. A bookshelf filled with novels we bought with good intentions and biographies of people whose lives seem more substantial than our own. Everything arranged to tell the story of a man who followed the rules and found happiness in the following. But underneath the surface of this carefully constructed life, there has always been a restlessness, a silence I have never broken. It lives in the space between my thoughts, in the pause before I answer when someone asks if I am happy. It shows itself in small ways. The way I sometimes catch myself staring out the window during conversations. The way I volunteer to work late when Elaine has plans with her friends. The way I have never felt entirely present in my own life. At dinner parties, I am the quiet one in the corner, nursing a single drink and nodding along to conversations about promotions and vacation plans and the latest streaming series everyone is supposed to be watching. Elaine's friends are kind people who try to include me, but I have never learned the language they speak. The casual intimacy of shared references and inside jokes. The way they can fill hours with talk that feels both meaningful and effortless. Instead, I find myself thinking about other things. Other times. The summer I turned 18, riding my bike through the quiet streets of our old neighborhood in the early evening light. The way the air smelled of cut grass and barbecue smoke. The way my heart would speed up as I approached the Holt house, my hand tightening on the handlebars. Those first summers with Adrian were innocent enough. Board games spread across the kitchen table, the afternoon sun streaming through the windows. Helping him with homework assignments about books I had read the year before. making ice cream sundaes on the back porch while his parents worked late into the evening. He was bright and curious, the kind of child who asked questions that made you think. Why do people have to work jobs they do not love? What happens to the part of you that dreams when you stop paying attention to it? I told myself I was just being responsible, just doing what I was paid to do. But even then, I was aware of something shifting between us. The way conversation came easily when it was just the two of us. The way he would look at me when he thought I was not paying attention, as if he was trying to solve a puzzle. The way I found myself looking forward to those evenings with an intensity that felt both wonderful and dangerous. As Adrian grew older, the dynamic changed in ways I could not ignore. His voice deepened and broke, cracking on words that made him blush and laugh at himself. He grew taller, his childhood softness replaced by the angular awkwardness of adolescence. But it was more than physical changes. There was a new confidence in the way he carried himself, a self-awareness that made our interactions feel charged with possibility. I began to notice the way he would linger in conversations, as if he was waiting for me to say something I never said. The way he would find excuses to brush past me in the narrow hallway, his shoulder touching mine for just a moment longer than necessary. The way he would suggest we watch movies that required us to sit closer together on the couch, sharing a bowl of popcorn in the flickering light of the television. I told myself I was imagining things. He was just a kid, and I was reading meaning into innocent moments because I was lonely and confused and 18 years old myself. But late at night, lying in my narrow bed in my parents' house, I would replay every conversation, every glance, every accidental touch. I would think about the way he had looked at me when he asked if I believed in soulmates, the question hanging in the air between us like something fragile and precious. The summer I turned 19, I stopped babysitting. I told his parents I was too busy with college preparations, too focused on my future to take on the responsibility. They understood, of course. They wished me well and hired someone else, a girl from Adrian's school who was cheerful and appropriate, and safe in all the ways I was no longer sure I was. I buried those memories for years, packed them away like childhood toys I had outgrown. Built a life that made sense on paper, that looked right from the outside, that never required me to examine the spaces between what I wanted and what I allowed myself to have. Until last night, when I found myself standing in my kitchen at midnight, holding a photograph and finally admitting the truth I have been hiding from for 20 years. 3 weeks after that midnight moment in my kitchen, the email arrives. I am at my desk, responding to routine correspondence about budget projections and quarterly reports, when the notification appears in the corner of my screen. The sender's name stops my breath in my throat. Adrian Holt. The subject line reads simply, "It's been a long time." My finger hovers over the mouse, trembling slightly. 20 years of careful distance, of buried memories, of the life I built to forget, and here is his name in my inbox like a door I thought I had permanently closed. I click. The message is brief, casual in the way that only comes from someone who has spent years learning how to sound effortless. He tells me he has returned to the city after years abroad, working for some humanitarian organization whose name I recognize from news articles about clean water initiatives in developing countries. He found my contact information through his mother, who apparently still speaks fondly of the responsible young man who used to watch her son during those long summer evenings. Between the lines, though, I sense something heavier. A weight in the carefully chosen words, a formality that feels like protection. He writes that he has thought of me often over the years, wondered how I was, what I was doing, whether I was happy. The question mark after that last word sits on my screen like an accusation. The email ends simply, "If you're free, I'd love to catch up. Maybe dinner." I stare at those words until they blur. My heart pounds against my ribs the way it did when I was 18, and trying to convince myself that what I felt was normal, manageable, something I could control. Around me, the office continues its quiet hum of productivity. Phones ring. Keyboards click. People live their ordinary lives while mine tilts off its axis. I start to type a response 3 separate times. The first is too eager, full of questions and exclamation points that betray how desperately I want to see him. The second is too cold, a polite declination that cites busy schedules and prior commitments. The third strikes some impossible balance between warmth and caution, but reading it back, it sounds like it was written by someone afraid of his own words. I delete all three and close my laptop. That evening, Elaine asks if I am feeling well. I have been quiet during dinner, pushing food around my plate and responding to her questions about weekend plans with distracted nods. I tell her it is work stress, nothing serious, and she accepts this explanation the way she accepts most of my silences. With patience and the kind of distance that comes from loving someone you have never quite learned to reach. 2 days later, I finally respond to Adrian's email. I write that I would like to see him, that dinner sounds nice, that I am sorry it took me so long to reply. I suggest a restaurant downtown, somewhere public and neutral, somewhere that feels safe. We arrange to meet on a Thursday evening. I spend the entire day distracted, checking my reflection in bathroom mirrors and second-guessing my choice of shirt. By the time I arrive at the restaurant, my palms are damp with sweat and my heart is racing like I am about to commit a crime. He is already there when I walk in, sitting at a table by the window, and the sight of him stops me completely. He is no longer the boy I remember, obviously, but neither is he a stranger. His features have sharpened with age, his shoulders broadened, his hair darkened to a rich brown. But his eyes are the same, wide and thoughtful and impossibly blue. When he sees me, he smiles, and for a moment I am 17 again, standing on his front porch with my heart hammering against my chest. We embrace briefly, carefully. His hand lingers on my shoulder for just a moment longer than necessary, and I catch the scent of his cologne, something warm and unfamiliar that makes me want to lean closer. We talk about safe things at first. His work overseas, the places he has lived, the languages he has learned. I tell him about my job, about the house, about the life I have built that sounds smaller and more careful when I describe it aloud. He listens with the same focused attention I remember from those summer evenings, as if every word matters, as if he is trying to understand not just what I am saying, but what I am not saying. The conversation flows easily, but underneath it runs a current of awareness that makes the simplest interactions feel charged. When he reaches for his water glass, I notice the way his fingers curve around the stem. When he laughs at something I say, I find myself studying the line of his throat, the way his eyes crinkle at the corners. When he asks if I am happy, really happy, I pause too long before answering. We talk about the past eventually, though carefully, like we are walking through a room full of things that might break. Summer evenings and board games and the movies we used to watch curled up on opposite ends of his living room couch. He remembers details I thought I had forgotten. The way I used to let him stay up past his bedtime if he promised to brush his teeth without being reminded. The night we watched a thunderstorm from his bedroom window, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder. The last evening I came to babysit, when his parents came home early and found us asleep on the couch, me reading and him with his head pillowed on my arm. I don't mention the moment at his front door years later, when he asked me to stay and I walked away instead. Neither does he. But it sits between us like something alive, breathing in the silences that stretch a little too long. After dinner, we walk slowly toward his apartment building. The night is warm, the streets filled with the soft sounds of a city settling into evening. People pass us in couples and groups, living their uncomplicated lives, and I envy them their easy intimacy, their freedom to touch and laugh and be themselves without calculation. We stop outside his building, a converted warehouse in a neighborhood that has been gentrified since we were young. The streetlights cast long shadows across the sidewalk, and somewhere in the distance, music drifts from an open window. He turns to face me, and in the lamplight I can see the careful control in his expression, the way he is holding himself back from something. His hand rises slightly, as if he might touch my sleeve, but then falls back to his side. "You could come in," he says softly, "just for a bit." The words hang between us like a question I have been avoiding for 20 years. In his voice, I hear the echo of that teenage boy who once asked me to stay, who stood in his doorway watching me choose safety over truth. But I also hear something new. The confidence of a man who knows what he wants and has learned how to ask for it. I should say yes. Every part of me except the part that has spent 2 decades learning to be careful wants to follow him up those stairs, to sit in his living room and continue this conversation that feels like coming home after a long journey. But the weight of my other life, my safe life, presses down on me like a physical thing. I tell him I should go home, that Elaine will be waiting, that it is getting late. He nods, though something flickers across his face that might be disappointment or understanding or both. He tells me he is glad we did this, that he hopes we can do it again soon. He leans forward and kisses my cheek, a gesture that could be purely friendly but feels like a promise. I walk back to my car with his invitation echoing in my head. You could come in, just for a bit. The words follow me home, through my quiet conversation with Elaine about how my evening went, through my careful responses about old friends, and catching up and how nice it was to see him again. That night, I lie awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about the space between what we want and what we allow ourselves to have. About doors we choose not to walk through and the cost of that choosing. About the man I have become and the boy I used to be who knew, somehow, that this moment would come eventually. Outside my window, the city breathes its night rhythms, full of people making choices I have never been brave enough to make. And somewhere across town, Adrian is falling asleep in his own bed, probably wondering if he made a mistake in asking, if 20 years is too long to wait for someone to find their courage. But he asked, and for the first time in decades, I am allowing myself to imagine what might happen if I said yes. The second time I see Adrian, it is under the pretense of helping him choose furniture for his new apartment. He mentions over text that he has been living with borrowed pieces and sleeping on an air mattress, and I find myself offering assistance before I can think about what that means. It starts innocently enough. We spend a Saturday afternoon wandering through furniture showrooms, debating the merits of different couch fabrics, and arguing good-naturedly about whether a dining table for 4 is optimistic or practical for a single man. He tries to pay for lunch afterward, and when I insist on splitting the check, our hands brush as we both reach for the bill. The contact lasts only a moment, but I feel it like an electric shock running up my arm. That evening, I tell Elaine about my day in careful, edited terms. An old friend who needed help with errands. Nothing more complicated than that. She nods and returns to her book, and I realize how easy it has become for us to live parallel lives in the same space, touching occasionally but never truly connecting. The third time I see Adrian, it is a Thursday night when Elaine is at her book club. He texts me around 8, asking if I want to grab a drink, and instead of making an excuse about being tired or having work to do, I find myself saying yes. We meet at a quiet bar near his apartment, the kind of place with exposed brick walls and candles on every table. The conversation flows as easily as it did at dinner, but there is something different now. A comfort level that allows for longer silences, for the kind of eye contact that would feel too intense with anyone else. He tells me about his years abroad, about sleeping in tents in refugee camps and learning to fix water pumps with spare parts and determination. About nights when he would lie awake wondering what he was doing with his life, whether the work mattered, whether he was running towards something or away from it. His honesty is disarming, and I find myself sharing things I have never told anyone. The way I sometimes feel like I am watching my own life from a distance. The dreams I had when I was younger that I let die quietly, one compromise at a time. The persistent feeling that I am living someone else's version of what happiness should look like. When he walks me to my car, there is a moment where we both hesitate before saying goodbye. He leans against the passenger side door, his face illuminated by the streetlight, and tells me he is glad I came out tonight. That it has been a long time since he felt like he could talk to someone the way we have been talking. I want to reach out and touch his face, to close the distance between us, but instead I unlock my car and drive home to Elaine and our quiet house and the life I have built to keep myself safe. After that, our meetings become more frequent. Coffee on Sunday mornings when Elaine sleeps late. Lunch during my work breaks, when he is free between job interviews. Long walks through the city neighborhoods we both remember from childhood, pointing out houses where friends used to live and comparing notes on how everything has changed. I help him assemble the furniture we chose, spending an entire weekend in his apartment with screwdrivers and instruction manuals and takeout containers scattered across his living room floor. His place is smaller than the house I share with Elaine, but it feels more alive somehow. Books stacked on every surface, plants crowding the windowsills, photographs from his travels pinned to a corkboard above his desk. It looks like the home of someone who is fully present in his own life. We work in easy companionship, our movements becoming synchronized as we figure out which pieces go where and how to make sense of the wordless diagrams. When I hand him a screw or hold a piece steady while he tightens a bolt, our fingers touch more often than strictly necessary. When we finally finish assembling his dining table, we sit across from each other with beers and Chinese takeout, and I realize this is the most relaxed I have felt in months. Adrian has a way of looking at me that I am learning to recognize. It is the same focused attention he gave me during those summer evenings when he was 12, but tempered now with something adult and knowing. When I tell him about a frustrating day at work or a disagreement with Elaine, he listens not just to my words but to the spaces between them. He asks questions that cut straight to the heart of things, that force me to examine feelings I have been avoiding. One evening in late fall, we are walking along the river when it starts to rain. Not the gentle drizzle that makes people walk a little faster, but a sudden downpour that sends everyone running for cover. We duck into a coffee shop and order drinks we do not really want, shaking water from our hair and laughing at how quickly we both got soaked. The coffee shop is crowded and warm, filled with the chatter of other people who have taken shelter from the storm. We find a small table near the back and sit closer together than we usually do, our knees almost touching under the narrow surface. Adrian wraps his hands around his mug and tells me about a relationship he had in Cambodia, a woman he almost married before realizing that he was in love with the idea of her rather than who she actually was. I tell him about Elaine, though I find it difficult to explain our relationship in words that do not sound clinical. We care about each other, I say. We have built something stable together. But even as I speak, I can hear how hollow it sounds, how much I am leaving unsaid. He studies my face in the warm light of the coffee shop, and I feel exposed in a way that is both terrifying and exhilarating. Do you love her? He asks quietly. Not because you should or because it makes sense, but because you cannot imagine your life without her. I open my mouth to say yes, because that is what I am supposed to say, what I have been telling myself for years. But the word will not come. Instead, I find myself talking about comfort and compatibility and the way some relationships are more about avoiding loneliness than about genuine connection. Adrian nods as if he understands something I am only beginning to figure out myself. He tells me about the masks we wear to fit into the lives we think we are supposed to want, about the difference between being safe and being alive. His voice is gentle but insistent, and I realize he is not just talking about relationships in general. He is talking about us, about this thing that is growing between us despite all my attempts to keep it contained. The rain continues for over an hour, and we stay in that coffee shop long after our drinks have gone cold, talking about loneliness and authenticity and the particular sadness that comes from living a life designed by someone else's expectations. When the storm finally passes, we walk slowly back to where I parked my car, neither of us wanting the evening to end. A few weeks later, I am at Adrian's apartment helping him hang pictures when he asks if I have ever felt like I was sleepwalking through my own life. We are standing in his living room, me holding a frame steady while he adjusts the placement, and the question catches me off guard in its directness. I tell him yes, more often than I care to admit. That sometimes I feel like I am watching myself from outside my own body, going through the motions of a life that fits me like clothes tailored for someone else. He steps down from the stepladder and stands close enough that I can smell his shampoo, something clean and citrusy that makes me want to lean into him. We hang the last picture in silence, but the air between us feels thick with possibility. When he brushes past me to put the hammer away, his shoulder touches mine, and neither of us moves to create distance. We stand there for a moment, close enough that I can feel the warmth radiating from his body, and I think about how easy it would be to close the gap between us completely. Instead, I step back and suggest we order dinner, And he agrees, though something flickers across his face that might be disappointment or understanding or both. The evening I will remember most clearly happens in December, when the city is dressed in early snow and the windows of Adrian's apartment are fogged with condensation from the heat inside. I have stayed later than usual, helping him research job opportunities and sharing a bottle of wine that has made us both more honest than we usually allow ourselves to be. He is standing by the living room window, looking out at the snow falling in the lamplight, and there is something in his posture that makes him seem younger and more vulnerable than usual. His reflection is ghostly in the glass, overlaid with the image of the winter street beyond. "Do you ever wonder if you missed something?" he says without turning around. "Something you were too scared to reach for." His voice is barely above a whisper, but in the quiet of his apartment, the words land with the weight of a confession. I know he is not talking about career opportunities or travel destinations or any of the safe things we might have discussed earlier in the evening. I am sitting on his couch, the wine making me brave enough to really look at him, to take in the line of his shoulders and the way his breath creates small clouds of condensation on the window. "Yes," I tell him, "more often than I should." He turns then, and in the lamplight his eyes are darker than usual, serious in a way that makes my heart speed up. We look at each other across the small distance of his living room, and I feel like we are standing at the edge of something that will change everything if we take one more step forward. The silence stretches between us, full of 20 years of careful distance and all the words we have never said. Outside, the snow continues to fall, muffling the sounds of the city and creating the feeling that we are the only two people in the world. I should leave, I tell him, though neither of us moves. I should go home to Elaine and our quiet house and the life I have spent so long constructing. "Should you?" he asks, and the question hangs in the air like something fragile and precious that might break if we breathe too hard. I do not answer, because I am finally beginning to understand that the answer is not as simple as it used to be. That the life I thought I wanted may not be the life I need. That the boy who once asked me to stay has grown into a man who is still asking, in his own way, still waiting for me to find the courage to say yes. It happens on a Thursday night in January, when the trains are running late, and we have shared too much wine with dinner and too many truths in the hours that followed. We are in his apartment again, but this time the conversation has wandered into territory we have never explored before. About the relationships that shape us. About the difference between settling and choosing. About the way some connections transcend logic and timing and all the careful reasons we use to talk ourselves out of what we want. I am supposed to catch the 10:15 train home, but when I check my phone, I discover the last departure was 20 minutes ago. The next one is not until morning. I could call Elaine, ask her to pick me up, but the wine has made me honest enough to admit I do not want to leave yet. That I am not ready for this evening to end. Adrian offers me his couch without hesitation, the way friends do when circumstances require simple hospitality. He brings me a pillow and a blanket that smells like the detergent he uses, something clean and unfamiliar that reminds me I am not in my own life tonight. We say goodnight in the careful way we have perfected over these months, polite and distant enough to maintain the fiction that what is happening between us is purely platonic. But as I am arranging the blanket on his couch, trying to settle into sleep in a room that feels charged with possibility, I hear his footsteps in the hallway. He appears in the doorway of the living room, backlit by the dim light from his bedroom, and I can see he is struggling with something. Before I can ask what is wrong, he crosses the room and sits on the edge of the coffee table, close enough that our knees are almost touching. His face is serious in the half-light, and when he speaks, his voice is so quiet I have to lean forward to hear him. "I need to tell you something," he says. "Before you fall asleep in my apartment and wake up tomorrow and we go back to pretending this is just friendship." My heart starts racing before he has even finished the sentence. Some part of me knows what is coming, has been preparing for this moment even as I have been trying to avoid it. He tells me he has been thinking about us since that first dinner, about the way we fit together in conversation, about how natural it feels to spend time in each other's company. He tells me about the nights he has lain awake wondering if I feel it too. this pull between us that seems to exist outside of logic or convenience. He tells me he knows I am with Elaine, knows I have built a life that does not include room for complications like this, but that he cannot keep pretending he does not want more than friendship. I should stop him, should remind him about my relationship, my responsibilities, the careful stability I have spent years constructing. But instead I find myself listening to every word, memorizing the way his voice sounds when he is being completely honest, the way his hands move when he is nervous. When he finishes speaking, the silence between us feels enormous. I can hear the radiator clicking in the corner, the distant sound of traffic on the street below, my own heartbeat loud in my ears. He is waiting for me to respond, but I do not trust myself to speak without saying everything I have been trying not to feel. Instead, I reach out and touch his hand where it rests on his knee. His skin is warm and slightly rough, and the simple contact sends electricity up my arm. He looks down at our joined hands, then back at my face, and I see something shift in his expression. Neither of us moves for a long moment. We sit there in his living room with the streetlight filtering through the windows, casting everything in soft shadows, and I feel like we are balanced on the edge of a cliff. One small movement in either direction will change everything forever. Then Adrian stands, slowly, and extends his hand to me. Not pulling, not insisting, just offering. And after 20 years of careful distance, of denying what I have always known to be true, I take it. He leads me to the center of the room, and we stand facing each other in the pale light from the street. His free hand comes up to touch my face, his fingers tracing the line of my cheek with a gentleness that makes my chest tight with emotion. I should pull away, should remember all the reasons this is impossible, should think about Elaine sleeping in our bed across town, trusting me to come home in the morning unchanged. But when Adrian leans closer, when I can feel his breath against my lips, all of that falls away. There is only this moment, this choice, this truth I have been running from since I was 17 years old. The kiss is soft at first, tentative, as if he is giving me space to change my mind. But I do not change my mind. Instead, I kiss him back, and 20 years of careful control dissolve like sugar in water. His arms come around me, and I let myself fall into him completely, into this feeling I have denied myself for so long it feels like coming home to a place I never knew I was looking for. When we finally break apart, we are both breathing hard. He rests his forehead against mine, and I can see my own wonder reflected in his eyes. Neither of us speaks, because there are no words for this moment, for the way the world has just rearranged itself around us. He kisses me again, deeper this time, and I respond with an urgency that surprises me. All the careful distance I have maintained, all the walls I have built to keep myself safe, crumble in the space of a heartbeat. I have never wanted anything the way I want this. Want him. Want the truth of who I am when I am not performing the role I think I am supposed to play. We end up on his couch, tangled together in the soft light from the window, learning the geography of each other's bodies with a reverence that feels almost sacred. Every touch is a revelation, every kiss an admission of something I have spent decades trying not to know about myself. Later, much later, we lie together in the quiet darkness, my head on his chest, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. His fingers trace lazy patterns on my arm, and I feel more present in my own skin than I have in years. This is what I have been missing, I realize. This sense of completeness, of being fully known and completely accepted. But as the night hours stretch toward dawn, reality begins to creep back in. I think about the text message I should send to Elaine, explaining why I never came home, about the life I will have to return to in the morning, the questions I will have to answer, the choices I will have to make. Adrian must sense my thoughts turning, because he tightens his arms around me slightly. We will figure it out, he says quietly. Whatever comes next, we will figure it out together. I want to believe him. Want to believe that love is enough to overcome the practical complications of untangling a life I have spent years building. But as the sky outside his windows begins to lighten with the approach of dawn, I am acutely aware of how much courage it will take to choose truth over safety, authenticity over convenience. When morning comes, I sit at Adrian's kitchen table in clothes I wore yesterday, watching him make coffee with movements that are both familiar and strange. The domesticity of it is overwhelming. This is what mornings could be like, I think. This easy companionship, this sense of rightness, this feeling of being exactly where I belong. My phone buzzes with a text from Elaine. Where are you? Are you okay? I stare at the message for a long time, trying to figure out how to respond. How do you explain that you are exactly where you need to be for the first time in your adult life? How do you tell someone who loves you that you have finally discovered what love actually feels like? Adrian sets a mug of coffee in front of me and sits across the table, his expression gentle but serious. We both know that what happened last night was not just a moment of weakness or confusion. It was the truth finally surfacing after decades of being buried, and now we have to decide what to do with it. The coffee is hot and bitter, and I wrap my hands around the mug like an anchor. Through the kitchen window, I can see the city waking up, people beginning their ordinary days, living their uncomplicated lives. But there is no going back to ordinary for me. Last night changed everything, and sitting in Adrian's kitchen in the growing light of morning, I realize I do not want to go back. For the first time in 20 years, I want to move forward, even though I have no idea where that will lead. I text Elaine that I fell asleep at a friend's place after missing the last train, that I am sorry for not calling, that I will be home soon. The lie comes easily, which frightens me more than I expected. 24 hours ago, deception would have felt foreign on my tongue. Now it slides out like something I have been practicing my entire life. The train ride home gives me 40 minutes to construct a version of last night that I can live with, at least temporarily. I rehearse casual explanations about old friends and too much wine and comfortable couches. By the time I reach our street, I have almost convinced myself that I can return to my life unchanged, that what happened with Adrian can be contained like a secret I carry but never act upon. But the moment I walk through our front door, I know that nothing will ever be the same. Elaine is making breakfast, moving around our kitchen with the practiced efficiency of someone who has performed this routine thousands of times. She looks up when I enter, and her smile is warm but concerned. "You look tired," she says, and I realize she is studying my face in a way that makes me feel exposed. I am tired, not from lack of sleep, but from the weight of carrying two versions of myself simultaneously. The man who spent the night in Adrian's arms, and the man who kisses his girlfriend good morning and asks about her plans for the weekend. The distance between these two selves feels impossibly vast. Over the following weeks, my world begins to fracture in ways both subtle and profound. At work, I find myself staring out my office window for long stretches, reliving moments from that night with a clarity that makes my chest tight with longing. Simple tasks take twice as long as they should because my mind wanders to the memory of Adrian's hands, the sound of his breathing in the darkness, the way he looked at me when I finally allowed myself to be seen. My colleagues notice my distraction, though they attribute it to stress or seasonal depression or any of the acceptable explanations for a man in his late 30s who seems to be sleepwalking through his professional responsibilities. I let them think what they want. The truth is too complicated to explain, even to myself. At home, Elaine watches me with increasing concern. She asks if I am feeling well, if something is bothering me, if there is anything she can do to help. Her kindness makes everything worse, because I can see that she genuinely cares about my well-being even as I am planning how to destroy our life together. I try to be present with her, to engage in our evening conversations about work and weekend plans, and whether we should repaint the guest bedroom. But my responses feel hollow, performed rather than felt. She notices, of course. How could she not? After 3 years together, she knows the rhythm of my moods, the subtle signs when something is wrong. One evening in February, as we are cleaning up after dinner, she sets down the dish she is drying and turns to face me fully. "You have been different lately," she says. Distant. Like you are thinking about something you cannot tell me. The directness of her observation catches me off guard. I consider lying again, inventing work stress or family concerns or any of the safe explanations that might satisfy her. But looking at her face, at the genuine worry in her eyes, I realize I cannot keep deceiving someone who has done nothing wrong except love a man who has never been fully honest with her. I tell her I have been thinking about our relationship, about whether we want the same things, about whether we are together because we choose each other or because it is comfortable and expected. The words come out more raw than I intended, and I can see them land like small wounds. She asks if I want to break up, and I hear the fear in her voice underneath the calm exterior. I tell her I do not know, which is both true and completely inadequate. What I cannot tell her is that I have spent the last month living two lives, and I am finally beginning to understand which one feels real. That weekend, I make an excuse about needing to clear my head and drive to Adrian's apartment. I have seen him twice since that night, both times in public places where we could maintain the pretense of ordinary friendship. But the weight of what remains unspoken between us has been growing heavier with each passing day. He opens his door looking surprised to see me, then concerned when he notices my expression. I realize I must look as broken as I feel, torn between the life I have built and the truth I can no longer ignore. We sit on his couch, the same place where everything changed weeks ago, and I tell him everything. About the sleepless nights and the fractured days. About feeling like I am living inside a lie that grows more exhausting with each breath. About Elaine's questions and my inability to answer them honestly. About the realization that I have spent 20 years building a life shaped by fear rather than desire. Adrian listens without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When I finish speaking, the silence between us feels enormous, full of all the choices I am afraid to make and all the consequences I cannot predict. Finally, he asks the question I have been dreading. And now? What do you want to happen now? The simplicity of the question undoes me completely. I break down in his living room. Years of careful control dissolving into tears I have been holding back since I was 17 years old. I tell him I do not know how to choose between destroying the life I have spent years building and living with the weight of denying who I really am. That the thought of hurting Elaine makes me sick, but the thought of never touching him again feels like death. I admit that I do not know if I am brave enough to step into the unknown, to face the judgment and questions and practical complications that come with choosing truth over safety. That I have spent so long being the responsible one, the steady one, the one who never causes problems, that I do not know how to be the person who disrupts everything for the sake of authenticity. Adrian pulls me closer, and I let myself collapse into him completely. He holds me while I fall apart, his hand stroking my hair, his voice quiet in my ear telling me that it is okay to be afraid, that fear does not mean I am weak, that some choices require more courage than we think we possess until we are forced to find it. When my tears finally subside, we sit together in the growing darkness of his living room. I feel emptied out, hollowed by the admission of how lost I have been, but also lighter somehow, as if naming my fear has robbed it of some of its power over me. Adrian does not try to convince me to leave Elaine or to promise him a future I am not sure I can deliver. Instead, he tells me something that cuts straight to the heart of everything I have been struggling with. You do not have to answer now, he says quietly, but you cannot keep hiding. Not from me, not from yourself, not from the life you actually want to live. His words settle into the space between us like a challenge and a gift simultaneously. Because he is right. I have been hiding for so long that I barely remember what it feels like to live without masks, without careful distance, without the constant vigilance required to keep my true self contained. As I drive home that night, his words echo in my head. You cannot keep hiding. The phrase feels like both an invitation and an ultimatum, a recognition that the choice I am facing is not really about him or Elaine or anyone else. It is about whether I have the courage to stop living as a carefully constructed version of who I think I should be and start living as who I actually am. The house is dark when I arrive, Elaine already asleep upstairs. I stand in our kitchen, the same place where this journey began with a photograph and a midnight revelation, and I realize that everything has been leading to this moment. To this choice between the safety of silence and the risk of truth. I do not have to decide tonight, but I know, with a clarity that is both terrifying and liberating, that I cannot keep living suspended between two worlds forever. Eventually, I will have to choose which life is real and which is the performance I have been giving for the sake of everyone else's expectations. The only question left is whether I will find the courage to choose myself. 3 weeks later, I am sitting at the same kitchen table where this story began, but everything has changed. The photograph is no longer hidden. It sits in plain sight now, propped against the salt shaker, two boys laughing in the back seat of a car from what feels like another lifetime. Next to it, my wedding ring rests on the wooden surface, carefully placed, its circle unbroken, but no longer binding me to a life I have finally admitted was never truly mine. The house is quiet. Elaine is upstairs, though we both know she will not be sleeping. We had the conversation 2 days ago, the one I had been rehearsing in my head for months without ever finding words adequate to the task. I told her about Adrian, about the truth I had been carrying since I was 17, about the realization that I could not keep living a life designed by fear instead of desire. She cried, which I had expected, but she also told me she had known, somehow, that something fundamental was missing between us, that our love had always felt more like partnership than passion, more like companionship than the consuming need that makes people rearrange their entire world for each other. She said she had been waiting for me to figure out what she had suspected for longer than either of us wanted to admit. Her forgiveness was perhaps the most difficult gift I have ever received, because it forced me to forgive myself as well. The conversation with my parents was harder. My mother asked careful questions about whether I was certain, whether this was something I could work through, whether I had considered counseling. My father said little, but when he shook my hand before leaving, his grip lingered longer than usual, and I understood that his silence was acceptance rather than judgment. I have not spoken to Adrian since the night I broke down in his living room, though I think about him constantly. Not because I am planning some grand romantic gesture or imagining that choosing authenticity guarantees a specific outcome, but because he was right about one fundamental thing. I cannot keep hiding from myself. So tonight, in the stillness of this kitchen that has witnessed so many small deceptions and careful silences, I write a letter. Not to Adrian, not to Elaine, not to anyone who might expect explanations or promises or declarations of what comes next. I write to myself, to the boy who stood on Adrian's front porch 20 years ago with his heart hammering against his ribs, too afraid to admit what he wanted. The words come slowly at first, then faster as I allow myself to write truths I have never spoken aloud. About the summers when I first understood that love could feel like drowning and breathing simultaneously. About the years I spent constructing a life that looked right from the outside while slowly suffocating on the inside. About the particular courage it takes to destroy something stable for the possibility of something real. I write about the weight of carrying secrets and the relief of finally setting them down. About the difference between the love that asks you to become smaller and the love that dares you to become yourself completely. About the recognition that some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again, and that this is not always a tragedy. The letter fills 3 pages, my handwriting growing looser and more confident as I continue. When I finish, I fold it carefully and slip it inside the frame with the photograph, where it will remain as a promise to myself. A reminder that I have finally chosen truth over comfort, authenticity over approval, the messy reality of who I am over the careful performance of who I thought I should be. Outside, the city continues its nighttime rhythm, full of people making choices both brave and cautious, both wise and foolish. Somewhere across town, Adrian is probably sleeping, unaware that I am finally becoming the person he saw in me before I could see it myself. Tomorrow, I will call him, not to make promises about the future, but to tell him that I understand now what he meant about not being able to hide anymore. I sit back in my chair and exhale deeply, as if I have been holding my breath for 20 years. The kitchen feels different now, charged with possibility rather than weighted with secrecy. This is what freedom feels like, I realize. Not the absence of responsibility or consequence, but the presence of choice. The recognition that I can build a life that fits who I actually am rather than who I think I should be. The photograph smiles up at me from its place on the table, two boys caught in a moment of pure joy, unaware of the years of careful distance that lay ahead of them. But distance has a way of circling back on itself sometimes, of bringing us home to truths we always knew but were too afraid to claim. I turn off the kitchen light and make my way upstairs, leaving the photograph and the ring and the letter where they are. In the morning, there will be practical decisions to make, difficult conversations to navigate, a life to rebuild from its foundations up. But tonight, I am simply a man who has finally stopped running from himself. For the first time in decades, that feels like enough.